The purpose of this podcast is to educate our listeners, and it does not constitute professional advice or services. The legal areas, services, law and process discussed are relevant at the time of recording, and it is important that you seek independent legal advice on such topics to ensure that the law has not changed or been updated in relation to the area of law you need advice on or are interested in.
Court is in session.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of Breaking the Silence and Understanding Domestic Abuse. Before we begin, I'd like to give a content warning. As I've already said, we're discussing domestic abuse, so this is going to be us talking about physical abuse, emotional abuse, coercive control, sexual abuse, and the impact these experiences can have on victims and their families. So if you're someone or you know someone who has experienced domestic abuse, some of today's discussions might be upsetting. So please take care whilst listening. Towards the end of the episode, we'll also be sharing organisations across the UK that offer confidential advice and support.
Domestic abuse is something that affects millions of people every year, but it's still surrounded by stigma, misunderstanding and silence. Many people think it only happens behind closed door or it only involves physical violence, but the reality is far more complex.
Exactly. Abuse isn't actually always visible, and it doesn't always leave bruises, and it certainly doesn't happen to one type of person. It can affect people of different ages, race, religion, sexuality, disability, income level and background.
So we want to educate you today. We will be talking about what domestic abuse really is, the different forms it can take, the statistics surrounding both female and male victims, why awareness campaigns often appear during football tournaments like the World Cup that's happening at the moment, how to recognise abuse if you're concerned about someone else, and where people in the UK can go for help.
Yeah, and we're also going to discuss some real life cases, not to sensationalise them, but to show how abuse can develop and gradually develop over time, and why recognising the warning signs early is so important.
So let's start with the basics. When people hear the phrase domestic abuse, what's the first thing they usually think of?
I think most people usually think of physical violence, so they're thinking of that hit, that smack, the kick, you just naturally assume domestic abuse is being hit, and actually that isn't the case.
No, so while it's absolutely one form of domestic abuse, and it's a very horrific form of domestic abuse, it's actually just one part of a much bigger picture.
Yeah, and actually the UK government in 2021 updated their definition of domestic abuse to include a pattern of behaviour between people who are personally connected, where one person seeks to control, intimidate or harm another, and then they gave like a whole list then of what that actually entails, so like physical, sexual, coercive control, financial, emotional, psychological, like the list is quite bulky.
So the important phrase there is that there is a pattern of behaviour. This isn't usually one isolated argument or disagreement. Healthy relationships have disagreements all the time. Domestic abuse is different because it's about one person repeatedly using fear, intimidation or control over another person.
Exactly, and whilst there isn't usually a pattern of starting with like the lower end of behaviour, it can be a one-off incident that does occur. I think that people need to know that also, that whilst typically most people have that, there's more than one thing going on, and there is the pattern of it. It can just be a one-off isolated incident sometimes. And many abusive relationships don't actually start off violently. In fact, actually many can begin in loving, caring relationships, and abusive behaviour can actually often develop slower over the months or years that they're together.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that victims don't simply just leave, and that's a big stigma surrounding domestic abuse, is people often ask, why didn't they just walk away? But it's an incredibly complicated question. Many victims don't even realise they're being abused until the behaviour has become normalised.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people in domestic abuse, or we certainly have it in here, that they've come out and were like, I didn't even realise I was in a domestic abuse relationship until they've come out with it, got the support that they needed, or have been told by the police that it's domestic abuse. Like, people don't actually realise that behaviour is a problem because they've kind of become used to it, because that's what their relationship,
that's all they know,
has become normalised for them in their relationship. But one thing that experts often say is that domestic abuse isn't actually really about anger, it's about power, it's about the control. An abusive partner tends to want to dominate another person emotionally, financially, physically or psychologically.
So that's why abuse often continues after someone tries to leave the relationship. Leaving is actually recognised as one of the most dangerous times for a victim, because the abusive person feels like they're losing control.
That's why there are specialist organisations out there that actually encourage victims to make safety plans rather than just simply leaving without support. Because can you imagine telling your abuser you've been abused for years that you're going to leave, you're just going to up and go? That probably puts you in the most dangerous situation, and potentially your children, because let's not forget a lot of people tend to have them, and you're just going to go, I'm going. that is like the most riskiest. And this is why people don't leave.
Yeah.
Or they flee in the dead of night with just like a bag packed. They might not even have a bag packed. They might just go, I've got to go.
Yeah.
Enough's enough. And it's a terrifying situation to be in.
Yeah, definitely. Another common misconception is that domestic abuse only affects women. Now, statistically, women are disproportionately affected by domestic abuse and are much more likely to experience repeated abuse, coercive control and serious violence.
However, men actually can be victims of domestic abuse too. While statistically it's not more common, it is becoming more common that men are reporting these incidences
More recognised
of happening. Abuse doesn't discriminate. Like, again, with the definition, it isn't just men and women. It could be a child against a parent, it could be a grandparent, as long as they're personally connected to one another. Domestic abuse can affect a whole wide range of people. Like, men can experience emotional abuse, they can experience physical abuse, they can experience sexual abuse, financial abuse, and that controlling behaviour. And it's exactly the same, but just with the different roles in a different sex, basically.
Yeah, but unfortunately, male victims often face additional barriers when seeking help. Some fear people won't believe them, others worry they'll be laughed at or seen as weak, and many just simply suffer in silence.
Yeah, absolutely. And domestic abuse also occurs in same-sex relationships. I think we need to identify that as well, because it isn't just about gender, as we said. Actually, domestic abuse comes down to the issue of power and control and the actual harm that's being caused to it. It's not gender specific.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the biggest myths surrounding domestic abuse. I'll start with the first one. Myth number 1, domestic abuse only happens in poor families.
That's false. So domestic abuse can happen across every social class of person. You could be a doctor, a teacher, a footballer, a lawyer. You could be, someone on universal credit, the footballers, police officers, business owners, students, retired couples. Nobody is immune. I think, as we've said, anyone can be a victim of domestic abuse, realistically.
Yeah, and anyone can be a perpetrator as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think statistically the statistics would probably show that it does happen in like the lower class society and like lower class families, but actually it's not discriminating. You'd be amazed how many like police officers are abused. Like, again, but these are the people who are meant to protect you.
Yeah.
But you'd be amazed how many, I suppose not police officers, but like people of power are abusers.
Yeah. Myth number 2, if there aren't bruises, it isn't abuse. Again, false. Some victims never experience physical violence. Instead, they experience years of emotional manipulation and coercive control. Experts often describe psychological abuse as leaving invisible scars.
Absolutely, and I think we've had discussions, haven't we, with professionals or like people in the past that they've said that the physical abuse is actually better than the psychological abuse, because the physical abuse is like an impact that you can deal with straight away that does kind of leave a hurt, but it's coming, it's dealt with, and then it's done.
Yeah.
Whereas the control and the psychological elements of that it's a gradual thing that happens over time, and you never know whether you're coming or going. It starts to make you feel crazy.
Yeah, it's constantly picking at you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another one, I suppose, is if it was really that bad, why didn't they leave? And like we've said already, unfortunately, leaving isn't that simple. I suppose especially as well if you've become financially reliant on that person, if they're controlling your finances, because you might fear the consequences of leaving, because I bet people have tried to leave and then been harmed in the process of doing that. You might have children that you've got to uproot and go, so you're not just removing yourself, you've got to take responsibility of other people. I've known people to leave and leave their children behind because it was safer for them to do that and then go back for them later. They may worry that nobody will believe them, or it may be that actually, because they still love that person. Like, I think domestic abuse relationships are quite complicated, aren't they? In that actually, like we've said, it becomes their normal, doesn't it, being in this relationship, and they don't know different. And actually what you're asking them to do is leave this scenario, and they're actually still in love with their partner.
So why do people say? So this is one of the most misunderstood aspects of domestic abuse. People often wonder why someone doesn't just pack a bag and leave. But there are many reasons.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you there. I think going back to what we were talking about when Ben asked the question about the Johnny Depp trial, I think one of the jurors said, was it the Johnny Depp trial? There was a documentary, and I'm sure it was on like Netflix or something, but one of the jurors said, I'm sure it was about Amber Heard, but basically said, well, she can't complain of domestic abuse and then stay, but she can't have her cake and eat it kind of thing. She just clearly didn't understand. No, it was about I know exactly what it was. It was the P. Diddy case now. You know, the 50 Cent documentary that he's done about it? It was about Cassie not leaving and staying with him. And one of the jurors was like, well, she can't want fame and stay with him for the fame and then not leave, basically saying like you can't have your cake and eat it kind of thing. And he just clearly didn't understand how domestic abuse worked. But sorry, carry on. They don't leave for many reasons.
Oh yeah, so how many reasons? So yeah, fear is one, financial dependence is another, there's children, housing, isolation, threats, immigration status, disability, lack of family support, the list just goes on.
Absolutely, and I think go back to the housing one as well, like a lot of people are like joint tenants, aren't they? Or like they jointly own a home, and it's like, they're like, well, why should I leave? Or why do I have to go kind of thing? Or it's like getting that protection of how do I stay in here? Because realistically, if you're a joint tenant or a joint owner, you have every right to stay in that property also, but that's now changing under the law with the new bill that's been brought in, that there's been protection going for social housing, that the abuser has to leave. But I haven't read up enough about that to like give more information on it. And the other issue, I suppose, is that abusive partners, as we said, I think we said about it last week, didn't we? They like to isolate their victims. So what's happened actually with that power of control, like you've probably found that you've lost contact with some of your friends, you might have lost contact members with your family members, sorry is what I was trying to say, or you know, you might not be going to work as much, you might have lost like a whole entire relationship and you're having to go out in your world alone and start again, which is like, it's a really difficult thing, isn't it? Like, one, we're asking you to leave a really like dangerous situation, potentially you're going out on that alone, potentially you're going with kids that you've got to care for, and we're just going, go. It's not as easy. Where are you going? If you've lost all of your support network in that, where is that person going? Yeah.
Another important concept is what's known as a cycle of abuse. So relationships are rarely abusive every single minute of every single day. There are often periods where everything seems normal or even wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So then typically what then happens, a cycle would look something like that. So we'll start with a happy, normal relationship, and then the tension builds. Arguments become more frequent. The victim will start to tread on eggshells. Then there'll be the abusive incident. And again, it doesn't have to be physical violence. It could be a threat, humiliation, that controlling behaviour that we've described. And then afterwards, what then tends to happen is that cycle starts again. So we're back into that honeymoon phase. The abusive partners apologise, you've forgiven him, everything's hunky-dory, rosy. And it all slowly like starts to creep back in again, because what they tend to do is buy you gifts. I'll promise I'll change, it will all be okay. And the cycle then starts to again. And I think with that cycle, people start to know the tricks and the triggers of what cause it to actually stop themselves from being harmed, or they know that what's going to come if they're in that sort of mood, if that makes sense. Like they almost learn the behaviour. And I think children pick up on that quite a lot, actually, is that children pick up in the abusive relationships what's going to trigger mum or dad to start an argument.
This repeated cycle can make it incredibly difficult for victims to leave the relationship, as they hold on hope that the loving version of their partner is going to come back and will be there all the time. But without intervention, sadly, the cycle often repeats and can become more severe over time.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes it harder to leave, isn't it? Because realistically, actually, these people are in love with one another. Like, you are asking you to live. Like, you might be married, do you know what I mean? You've got married in sickness and health, for better, for worse, you know, richer or poorer, and all of that jazz, but actually you might not be safe yourself to be in there. So that's actually given us the foundation then for understanding what domestic abuse actually is. But then in this next section, we're going to look much deeper into the different forms of abuse and what like form they can kind of take. So as we've already said, domestic abuse isn't always physical. I think that's what people think, don't they? And I think the old definition was physical domestic violence. So you always think of it's harmed them, it's a mark on the skin, it's left a mark somewhere, if that makes sense, but that actually isn't always the case.
So we'll also discuss coercive control, financial abuse, digital abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, with real life examples that help explain how these behaviours appear in everyday life. Let's begin with the type that most people recognise, physical abuse. This includes behaviours such as hitting, punching, kicking, slapping, pushing, choking, and more. Or using an object or weapon to cause harm.
Yeah, absolutely. So physical abuse can leave visible injuries, but not always injuries. And quite often, and I think it's quite a common one, most injuries are usually in a place that are hidden, so that you wouldn't know that there was obviously something going on. Because whilst these abusers are like harming you, they don't want people to know you are being harmed, because like what you'll probably find is it's in like a rib cage or in a stomach or like on your bum cheek, you know, it's places that you can hide, or if it's in the arm, it's like somewhere where you can hide it. And what will happen as well, like what you'll find is like where they are visible, victims tend to make excuses for that injury. Like, you know, we've all used it, haven't we? I hit my head on, or heard it, sorry, not used it necessarily, but I've hit my head on the stairs, I've tripped into the doorway or something like that, because they're actually frightened of telling the truth for the consequence that happens to them after.
But over time, people close to the victim may notice a pattern of injuries, missed work, cancelled plans, or unusual explanations that don't quite add up.
Yeah.
So while these signs don't automatically mean someone is being abused, they can certainly be indicators that something isn't right.
Yeah, absolutely. Which then kind of moves us on to another form of domestic abuse, which is actually quite another common one, which is the emotional abuse. So this is when someone is likely going to repeatedly undermine a person's confidence, self-worth, or emotional well-being, because examples probably would include like constant criticism, the name calling, humiliation, blaming the victim for everything that goes wrong, or making them feel like they're never good enough, or like quite another common one is making them feel stupid and not being clever enough to understand daily life, which isn't always the case.
Imagine hearing every day that you're stupid, unattractive, or worthless. Imagine being told that nobody else would ever love you, or that you're lucky anyone ever stays with you. Over time, these comments can have a huge impact, and victims often begin to believe them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've said this already, but emotional abuse has been said to like be quite harmful, because it like slowly chips away at your confidence. So someone who is quite outgoing and independent may become withdrawn, anxious, and unsure of themselves, because I think I said like the physical abuse, you know, like I say it's a one-off, you might be absolutely battered, but it's something that you can deal with. It's an impact that's there and then once it's stopped, it's done. Whereas this chips away at someone over time, and it's constantly chipping away. It just destroys your brain.
Yeah. Kind of flowing on from there then, and kind of in a similar way, another form of abuse is psychological abuse, which often includes gaslighting. Gaslighting is when someone deliberately makes another person question their own memory, judgment, or reality.
Yeah, so for example, an abusive partner might deny saying something, even if they clearly did that. They may move or hide belongings and then accuse the victim of being forgetful. They might tell the victim that they're overreacting or imagining things whenever they raise concerns.
And over time, victims can lose confidence in their own instincts. They may start apologising for things they haven't even done, or relying on the abusive partner to tell them what's real. And that's one reason psychological abuse can be so damaging. It attacks a person's sense of identity and reality.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, like leads on to the next example that we've got is the coercive controlling behaviour, which is actually one of the most significant changes that happened in the UK law, because once they updated the definition, coercive control has now been recognised as a form of domestic abuse. And it isn't usually like a one-off dramatic event. Again, it's a pattern of behaviour that occurs over time, designed to dominate everyone, like someone's everyday life, basically.
Yeah, and this could include deciding what someone wears, who they see, where they go, or when they leave the house. It might involve reading private messages, checking phone records, demanding passwords, or insisting on knowing someone's location at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the behaviour that we were talking about of when isolation starts to occur, because they might isolate the victim from their friends or their family. They might start saying, your family doesn't really care about you, or your mum, like your mum doesn't like me, so we're not going. Your friends are a bad influence on you. I don't want you to go out with them. Yeah. And at first, those comments, like they come across like quite caring and protective, but actually what happens is gradually over time that victim becomes more isolated and more dependent on their abusive partner, because what you'll probably start doing is start seeing your family less, start going out with your friends less and less to the point that you're dependent on that abuser.
Yeah. And coercive control can also include threats. An abuser might threaten to take away children, report someone to immigration authorities, for example, harm a beloved pet, or share private photos if the victim tries to leave. These threats are designed to create fear and maintain control and keep you in that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite fearful, isn't it? Can you imagine losing, you've been in a relationship where you might have sent your nudes or whatever, or you've done the video. It's a bit like Bear Thingy and Georgia Harrison, isn't it, where they'd made that sex tape together and then he put it all over social media, but she actually did end up reporting him for it. But can you imagine having that over you? I don't think she actually knew he'd done it. I can't remember the whole story there, but like, can you imagine having that like lured over your head when you try to leave? Or if you do this, I'm going to put it all over OnlyFans and like Instagram. It's just horrendous, isn't it? Another form then is financial abuse. So this one's quite often overlooked, I think. So I don't think people recognise it as financial control. So money obviously gives people independence, doesn't it? You know, people might have their own account, they might go into a joint account, but realistically, like, money gives us the independence to go and do what we want to do. But actually controlling then someone's finances can make it so much harder for them to leave the abusive relationship, because they might not have control of their money.
Financial abuse can take many forms. An abusive partner might prevent someone from working, taking control of their wages, refuse to let them access a bank account, or force them to explain every penny they spend. They may also build up debt in the victim's name or pressure them into taking out loans or credit cards.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, that's more common than people realise, is they've fallen to a signature or like told you to sign something that you don't necessarily know you're signing. The next thing you know, you're like heavily in debt because they've taken it out in your name. But because of that, then imagine having no access to your own money and no way to pay for transport, potentially food or accommodation when you're trying to leave. And that's why financial abuse can trap people in really dangerous situations, because how are you leaving without any money? Where are we sending you, basically?
Yeah.
It's horrendous.
And this one, I think, is probably one of the most horrific forms of abuse, and no one likes to hear this, but sexual abuse within relationships is another topic that's often misunderstood.
Absolutely.
Being in a relationship or even being married does not mean that someone has automatic consent to sexual activity, which I think a lot of people assume that they do because you're married, and I think a lot of women in particular, because you're in a relationship, they kind of just go along with it because they think they can't say no.
Yeah.
But consent must be freely given every single time.
And I think the thing was as well, wasn't it? Like, actually rape wasn't recognised in marriage, and it wasn't that long ago that the law changed. I want to say it was like in the 90s that it was recognised that women, like, you could be raped within your marriage, basically, because it does happen, because it's the whole issue about giving consent, isn't it? If you're not freely giving consent, it is rape.
Yeah.
And that can occur in relationships. But as we said, sexual abuse is quite wide, isn't it? And I think when we think of sexual abuse, people automatically go to rape, don't they? But actually, it could be a sexual assault, it can be unwanted touching, it can be pressure to perform sexual acts, or forcing someone to engage in sexual activity against their wishes. So it also can involve like reproductive control, such as interfering with contraception. You know, like people do. You might say that you're not having your pill, they might pierce like their condoms or something like that. Or actually pressuring someone into becoming pregnant when they don't want to be, or ending a pregnancy against their will.
Yeah, just awful.
Yeah.
Many victims find it particularly difficult to talk about sexual abuse because of the shame, the fear, or the concern that people won't believe them. And that's why it's so important to challenge myths around consent and support those who choose to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of ties into what you'd said earlier about sending like the sexual images, this next one and stuff like that. Digital abuse in today's era is becoming a more widely recognised concept, and I actually don't know whether the law might update and change with that over time. It's not currently in there, but it's becoming a more common with what we have now. Digital media is a new way that people can be abused, because what's happening is people are monitoring people on their phone. Like, you can get, I know my partner's I don't monitor it, but I can get on my partner's phone if I want it. Can you imagine someone like doing that and actually checking what you're up to? People check their emails, like once you open your phone, it cracks you up to a load of things, and they could be checking your private messages, installing tracking apps on your phone, or demanding access to social media accounts. It's no different, I suppose, to having your location switched on, is it?
Well, yeah, as you say, some abusers are using location sharing features to track where their partner is at all times.
Yeah.
Others repeatedly message or call throughout the day, not because they're caring, but because they're monitoring and controlling, which can amount to harassment, and that's one of those things that really chips away at you, and it really gets the victim down.
Yeah,
and it can be
like, you think Facebook, you can DM someone, Instagram, you can DM people on it, TikTok, just because you start to block people on like WhatsApp or whatever, there is loads of different ways that you can then people create fake emails, don't they, and start emailing you off it. Like,
Yeah,
it's quite,
exactly.
the media, when we were talking about obviously media last week and how it influences media in today's society, can actually be really dangerous for people in domestic abuse situations, because there is so much access to so many different features now that actually they can still use it to control and carry on. Like, you think of the amount of people that we have that are still going on in cases, and that what we've had to get people to do is use these family apps. Like, even the family apps that we use have now got tone readers in them to detect whether there's abusive language or abusive behaviour going on. Like, that is just bizarre, isn't it? Like, absolutely balmy that we live in a world where you're having to be warned that your message could be aggressive.
And then all of that you just listed then is amounting to online harassment.
Yeah.
And it's a tool that's used very often in abusive relationships, and I think it's one of those that people don't think about at all. It's part of that controlling behaviour.
And like, I suppose, like, both of us have got our location sharing, haven't we, for a different role that we both have.
Yeah.
But I can't say I sit and watch where you're at all times of the day. Like, that, you know, I know that we've joked before now, being like, I've checked where you were because you were running late, and we've had that, but like, I don't actively go and look where you are in your day-to-day life.
It's just as a safety feature.
Absolutely. Whereas these people are actually looking. Like, when my brother was in Australia, I would check in and see where he was.
Yeah.
Just to, to see what he was up to, because there was one point he was on an island that didn't have signal, and he was like, a couple of weeks before, someone had been eaten by a dingo or something like that, and so I was like, "He's still alive? Like, are you okay?" But I'm not actively checking. Like, couldn't tell you where he is now.
Yeah.
You know, so it does become like this really dangerous. Like, telephones are great, media is great, isn't it? But actually, in settings like this, it can become really dangerous situations for people. And I think that kind of leads on to then that the abuse barely fits into one category, does it? Like, I think we've kind of emphasised that in this, is that one thing to remember out of all of this is that actually there are different forms of domestic abuse, and they rarely actually happen on their own. Like, actually, it could be that a victim has started with physical violence, but then may also actually be dealing with emotional abuse, financial abuse, and coercive control all in one go. Or it could be the other way around, where they start off with the control and the small little details, and then bam, next thing you know, you've been punched in the face.
So, for example, imagine someone whose partner controls all the money, constantly insults them, checks their phone every evening, stops them from seeing friends, and occasionally becomes physically violent. Each individual behaviour is harmful on its own, but together they create a powerful system of control, and that can leave the victim feeling trapped and powerless.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why professionals don't just look for the bruises, do they? They look at the patterns of behaviour. As the law kind of says, it doesn't have to be, it can be a one-off isolated incident, but actually what tends to happen, and the professionals are telling us, there is a pattern of ongoing behaviour that's gone on. Like, it kind of goes down to, like, does one partner seem frightened to be making the simple decisions? Do they have permission before speaking or spending money? Are we looking at suddenly they've become isolated from family and friends? Do they seem anxious whenever the phone then rings? They are looking at the whole picture.
So these signs don't automatically mean that someone is experiencing a domestic abuse relationship, but they can be reasons to check in with someone gently and let them know that you're there if they have any support.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got, as I've said, we've covered the many different forms of domestic abuse can take, but understanding the scale of the issue actually, I think, is just as important.
And because abuse often happens behind closed doors, it's sometimes called a hidden crime. Many victims never report what they're experiencing, meaning the true number of cases is likely much higher than the official figures suggest. But we'll go through some statistics just to show the audience kind of the scale of it.
I think that comes back down to what we said about the men and women difference, isn't it? Like, men are getting better at reporting, actually. I think now that the world is recognising domestic, and I think we understand it, don't we? Because I think that it's going back to that conversation before, that people just assumed it happened in marriage and you were the property of your husband, that sort of stuff. But actually, it affects both men and women. And again, we discussed those two Netflix documentary or BBC documentaries, that Abused by My Girlfriend and Murdered by My Boyfriend, that show like actually it does occur in both relationships.
But let's begin with women, and then we can talk about men as well. Research suggests that around 1 in 3 women over the age of 16 will experience domestic abuse at some point in their lifetime, which is just such a shocking statistic. Because I remember it wasn't that long ago that it was 1 in 5 women.
Yeah.
And I think it might not necessarily be because abusive relationships are increasing, but it might just purely be that women are reporting it. And and there's more.
I definitely think we're living in a world that it's being reported more now because there is more awareness of it and what's going on. And I think, again, this is just statistically, it's not us saying it's gender specific, is it? But the majority of victims recorded by police and support services are women. And women are also more likely to be the ones that experience repeated abuse, coercive control, and the physical violence. And actually, women are also far more likely to be killed by a current or former partner. And Women's Aid have reported that on average, at least one woman every week is killed by her current or former, I think that's the other thing, or former male partner in the UK. I think that's the thing that we haven't discussed, is that you don't have to be in that current relationship either. Like, it can continue after. There's so many cases where the perpetrators continue that abuse afterwards, that it's just these poor people in these situations is horrendous.
And it just reminds us that domestic abuse isn't simply about arguments between couples. In most serious forms, it can be like completely fatal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like we've said, it's also important to acknowledge that it doesn't discriminate, doesn't it? And men can be male victims too. So whilst the women are disproportionately affected, thousands of men also do experience domestic abuse every year also. And research does suggest that 1 in 7 men will actually experience domestic abuse during their lifetime, which is quite high. And that's of reported cases as well. Like you said, like, there are still cases that are ongoing. We don't know. People aren't reporting it. So this is what we can give you based on what is available.
Many male victims don't report what they experience because they fear that they won't be believed. Some worry they'll be laughed at, others think people will question their masculinity, and some don't even recognise that what they experience is abuse because society often portrays men as being physically stronger. And I think that's a lot about like men's mental health and everything, and it's becoming a lot more recognised that like men do cry as well. Like, men don't have to be the strong figure. Like, they have their own emotions, they have their own feelings. They're allowed to experience them.
It comes down to as well, like, there is definitely far more support out there for women than there are men in domestic. Don't get me wrong, there are actually fantastic charities out there that are for men, but there is definitely the ratio of men's mental health or men's help for domestic abuse is far lower than the women. Because I'm going to ask Ben now a question. What I was going to ask you was, how would you feel as a man if you were being abused, would you feel comfortable reporting domestic abuse?
I think I'd fall quicker into the category of thinking that it's not actually abuse. I think I just keep convincing myself, like, it's not that bad. Whether it was physical or mental. It'd probably take me quite a while to try and work up the courage to really speak about it.
And I think, like, a lot of men are in that situation because, like, genuinely, like, typically men...
Why would a woman do it to a man?
Generally that is that stigma, isn't it? I can't possibly be abused by a woman, you know? It does happen.
And another group that we need to talk about as well, which it does also happen to, is children.
Absolutely.
And children don't have to be physically assaulted to become a victim of domestic abuse. And what we're seeing a lot of as well is that simply just witnessing abuse in the home can have lifelong consequences for them.
Absolutely, and I think we talk about this a lot. Children are victims in their own right in domestic abuse situations, so they may not witness it, they may not see the actual, let's say physical harm here, but like, imagine being 8 years old and hearing the abuse. You still hear it. Can you imagine listening to them shouting it? They might actually hear their parent being threatened. They might hear their parent actually being beaten up. It could be that they're hearing, you know, the door slamming in a relationship. It could be that they've heard I'm going to say dad here just because it's the first thing that came into my head, throwing a glass across the kitchen. Or is it that they've heard, I know I've said this already, but like, have they heard a punch and their mum go down, you know? It's that they live in this constant fear of what might happen next when they're at home. And it causes trauma. It causes trauma for them emotionally. And they I've said this already, but they learn to live with that behaviour. It becomes their normal. Like, children may not know, it's a bit about the relationships. Children might not know that they're actually living in an abusive household because it becomes their normal. Whereas actually they're a victim in their own right.
And they also learn to please each parent as well. So if one of the parents is abusive, they know how to sort of almost play the game to to not set them off, to not make them react in a certain way.
Absolutely, they learn the behaviour of like try and prevent a trigger, or they become the like not the mediator per se, but they become this like safety in the middle to be like, oh my god, I can see where this is going. Let's change my own behaviour to like get dad off. Again, I'm saying dad, but like let's get dad off the scent here, and hopefully mum will be all right tonight. Can you imagine putting that much responsibility on a child in that? Because I think that's a lot of the thing is, and I think again, wouldn't know the statistics on this, but actually what we see is a lot of people in relationships, the abuse is against each other, and they'll say, well, my child hasn't, I have never harmed my child. And actually, they probably haven't, but they don't realise actually they have harmed them in the process of doing the other actions of that, because they have heard it. Like, that causes trauma for these kids. It does cause trauma.
And we hear of older children particularly, like they're recording their parents' conversations because they already automatically assume that it's going to go south, it's going to go really like badly. So they record it to protect the other parent. Which is just, it's not a responsibility a child should have.
No, absolutely not.
And it just shows how domestic abuse can cause that anxiety and like the trauma within them in those situations. But it can also cause depression, difficulties at school and mental health challenges later in life. Some children may also struggle to understand what a healthy relationships look like when unless they go and receive support. And it's like going back to how it just becomes their normal, that's all they know.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what happens then is, isn't it, if we're not breaking the cycle, are we? They might then go on and repeat the cycle again. So we're now creating another generation of children potentially who are going to become grown-up adults that know that to them that behaviour is okay. When it's not, and we'll repeat the cycle. And this is when I don't know if we'll ever eradicate domestic abuse. I'm very all for it reducing and going, but I don't know if we'll ever completely get rid of it, because we kind of, that generational trauma kind of can go down, and but also that's a lot of experience to put on your a lot of pressure to put on your child, is breaking that generational trauma, isn't it? Because that child's either going to go on and repeat the behaviour when they're in an adult relationship, or they'll go, I did not like this growing up and I don't want it, and will go on and break the cycle. But again, that's so much pressure to put on a child.
It completely stems from the trauma that they've experienced, and it just goes to show that while you might not have harmed your child directly, it can completely affect them.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to like what you learned, wasn't it, with your ACEs and all of that. Like actually, if these children are stuck in these horrendous situations, how does it affect them then later in adult life, in terms of, can it go on and affect how their employment? Does it go on and affect what they're going to become in life? It has a huge impact, I suppose, on how they grow up, develop and move with life. And then obviously we've talked about now the children, we've talked about the statistics, but then as one question we get often asked is, if domestic abuse is so common, why don't we hear more cases about it? And the answer is actually most victims probably won't tell anyone that they're in a domestic abuse relationship, particularly whilst they're still in it.
Yeah, and there's many reasons for this. They fear the abuser mainly. They fear they're not going to be believed. They fear they have such financial dependence on the abuser, they can't leave. They don't want to uproot their children's whole lives, because if they leave a domestic abuse relationship, it might mean that they have to like move across the border. You might have to move county. They might have to move schools. They might have to. They lose all their friends, all their family around them, and there's also a lot of embarrassment and shame for them with reporting it, because they might think like, oh, it's all my fault. Like, why I should have stopped it. I did this, so that's why they did it. And obviously, like, naturally concerned about losing their home, or simply believing, as I said, that the abuse is their fault.
Yeah, 100%. And like, Women's Aid have actually reported that 1 in 5 women feel able to report domestic abuse to the police. 1 in 5. That's not that many at all. And I think that goes to show how much fear and stigma still surrounds this issue. Because actually, we live in a day and age now where the police is accessible. Like, you know, if you can't ring 999 and press that 555 and the silence button, you can report these things online now. Like the 101 service, you can do all online. Like, we live in a world where things should be reported or reportable easier, but they're not, because of the fear which still surrounds this whole issue.
So one topic that receives a lot of media attention is the link between domestic abuse and football tournaments, especially the major ones.
Great topic to talk about at the
moment. Such as like the FIFA World Cup and the UEFA European Championships. Now, I don't know anything about football. I could not tell you what that is, but I know that
England won their game last night and we're going to the quarterfinals.
There we are then. But it doesn't mean like football, the sports itself, causes domestic abuse.
No, and I think a lot of pressure has been put on that this year actually, because obviously Women's Aid and like Refuge and all that have done these campaigns of highlighting how it does cause more. It's usually the alcohol, you know, if England lose. They make it very clear why it comes about. But what's happened is they've actually put a lot of stigma on the footballers to be like, come on, make sure you win, so that these women aren't getting injured. Well, it's not the responsibility of Harry Kane to make sure that he wins the football, you know? But what does happen is millions of people watch football. As we know, the World Cup is currently on, and every year that the World Cup comes out, these campaigns, that's the word I was looking for, and they come out and they warn about it every year because the statistics are around that quite strong. But the responsibility actually lies with the perpetrator, not the sport. It may like add factor to it, but it's not the sport's fault. But researchers have found, again, and this is mainly Women's Aid, have found that reports of domestic abuse tend to increase when England play in major tournaments in the UK.
Yeah, and one recent campaign that they've done was called The Other Kickoff, and the creative review says that this campaign reminds people that while fans may be asking what time is kick-off, for some victims, the hours after the final whistle are the time they fear the most.
Absolutely, and I think the campaign highlights actually really well that the research shows that domestic abuse incidents increase by around 26% when England win or draw, or up to 38% when England lose during the major tournaments. Which is a deeply concerning thing, isn't it? Because actually it's important to understand then, what does that mean? Because football isn't creating abusive people, like they're already abusive, but instead what's actually happening is these major sporting events are triggering and escalating abusive behaviour that already exists in people.
Yeah, and experts believe that several factors may contribute to this. So there's like strong emotions surrounding their favourite football team winning or losing or whatever. There's alcohol consumption, late nights, gambling losses and heightened tension, and all of these can increase stress and tension within a household, but none of them excuse abusive behaviour.
No, not at all. And imagine like if 2 million people are all watching the same match, only a tiny minority of them actually become abusive afterwards. So that's going back to like what I said, it's not the match itself that's causing the behaviour. Domestic abuse is always the choice by the perpetrator, and the football in this instance is actually just being used as the excuse to enable their behaviour. And
campaigns like those ones by Women's Aid in particular are more about raising awareness. They're also about encouraging neighbours, friends and family to recognise the signs and know where help is available. And the local government association has said that police, charities and support organisations often prepare for increased demand during major tournaments because they know that these periods can be particularly dangerous for some victims.
Which is just mad, isn't it, actually? I've done it on our social media. I've supported the campaign to raise awareness of it because it is such a big thing that happens this time of year. But I think one message that we need to take away from this campaign is that football doesn't cause the domestic abuse, it's the abusers who do, which I think is actually such an important distinction, because actually we don't want to shift the responsibility away from that person choosing to use violence or control. It's an excuse that they're using to assert that violence or control.
Yeah, and it just creates such a dangerous environment, especially within homes.
Absolutely.
But statistics are often useful because they show the scale of the issue, but every percentage represents real people. They represent parents, children, friends, neighbours, people whose lives have been changed by domestic abuse.
Absolutely, and behind every statistic, isn't it, is there someone who has actually spent years of living in fear before asking for help. And that's why the awareness, the education, us doing this, I suppose, as well, and support is so important, because actually what we need people to do is understand domestic abuse and be better equipped in recognising it and supporting those affected. And I think that is becoming more prevalent in this day and age, because you've got, I know it's a bit different, but you've got the Ask for Angela campaign in pubs, isn't there? If you're not comfortable on a night out, they're saying come and ask for Angela, and the bar people know what to do. I can't remember what the campaign is about hairdressers, but there was something that came out for hairdressers to help recognise and whether their clients are potentially in a domestic abuse. So right for us, we do this like quite regularly. We have domestic abuse training on the regular, so we know about it or know what to expect and what to look at, but like we need the world to understand what's going on.
So now, as I said, going through statistics is really important, but it is real life people that are going through it. So we're going to talk about some real stories, and then hopefully will enable you to understand the impact that domestic abuse can have.
Yes, absolutely. So, as we said, we've talked about statistics, we've talked about the different types of domestic abuse, which will hopefully help you understand like these real case studies now and move us on. So we are going to start with these real life stories, and case one is going to be about Mel B. For those of you who don't know Mel B, which I'd be really shocked about if you didn't, is she is a singer. She was in the Spice Girls and has now become a television personality, and I believe she is actually is it a patron they call them in? I want to say she's a patron for Women's Aid. She might not still be, but she was ambassador, yeah. So she's had a really successful career, as we now know. She was, performing around the world. She's in a great girl band. She's been appearing on television. She's raised a family, and from the outside people probably assumed that she's got a fantastic life and everything was going well.
However, after leaving her marriage, Mel B spoke publicly about experiencing years of domestic abuse. She described emotional abuse, coercive control, financial control, and physical violence. One of the things that she has spoken about is how isolated she became during the relationship. She explained that she gradually lost confidence and began believing many of the negative things that she was being told about herself.
Absolutely, and I think that's something we've already mentioned, isn't it? That actually abuse often develops gradually. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a serious instance of violence. It can start off with something small, controlling behaviour that then becomes more frequent and more serious over time. And I think it goes back to what we said in the beginning. If Mel B is a huge TV personality, no one had any idea that was going on in the background, and then she's come out and told us all about it. It's quite, it can affect everybody basically, is what I'm trying to say.
So as you said, Mel B has since become a campaigner for survivors of domestic abuse and has worked with charities to raise awareness. By sharing her own experience, she's helped challenge the idea that abuse only happens to certain people. Her story reminds us that her wealth, her fame, and her success didn't protect her, and it doesn't protect anybody from being a victim.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to that misconception again of, because she was so famous and actually financially successful, wasn't she, that they could simply just leave. And well, she didn't. She couldn't, actually. That's not what happened there, because there are so many different factors that go into leaving.
And abuse isn't just about the money, it's about the fear, the manipulation, isolation and control. So someone like her can have millions of pounds, but she still felt trapped, and if they're constantly being threatened or psychological manipulated.
Yeah, absolutely. Which then I suppose leads us on to our next case study, which I know we touched on a little bit, didn't we, in our last one about media, is Claire Wood. So she is another case that actually had a major impact on domestic abuse policies in the UK. Claire was a 36-year-old woman who lived in Greater Manchester and had started a relationship with a man who, unknown to her, actually had a long history of violence against women. So although her friends became concerned and Claire herself had reported worrying behaviour to the police, she wasn't actually aware of his full criminal history and how dangerous her partner actually was. And sadly, in 2009, Claire was murdered by her partner, or former partner.
Yeah, and following her death, Claire's father campaigned for changes in the law so that people could find out whether their partner had a history of domestic abuse. And that campaign eventually led to what is now known as Claire's Law, officially called the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Claire's Law is the ability to allow someone to actually ask the police whether a current or former partner has a known history of violence or abusive behaviour. Actually, what I think is important to say here, it doesn't have to be the person in the relationship. If you as a friend have any concerns or know about the partner's history, you can request that information on their behalf and get it sent to them. And there's two parts of the scheme then. So there is the right to ask, so you can request that information if you're worried about their partner, and then it's the right to know, and then this is where the police can proactively disclose information if they believe someone may be at risk. The problem with that is I don't know if people can actually refuse to be told. Might be worth finding that out. It'd be interesting to know that. But of course, not every request results in information being shared either. And police have to consider whether the disclosure is actually necessary to protect someone from harm. But it's become a really important safeguarding tool in the UK, and I think it's also just come into Ireland too. Have now recognised it and brought it into their own law.
One of the biggest lessons from Claire's story is that friends and family should always take concerns seriously. If someone says they're frightened of a partner or mentions controlling behaviour, it's important to listen rather than to dismiss those worries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people assume abuse has to involve physical violence before it becomes serious, but actually coercive control, stalking, intimidation and threats are all significant indicators of risk.
So in terms of recognising the warning signs then, it's obviously in these examples, it's there were signs that their friends and family recognised. They could be, for example, it could be someone constantly checking their partner's phone, wanting to know where they are all the time, discouraging contact with friends and family, extreme jealousy, controlling finances, making all the decisions, and threatening self-harm if the relationship ends. Regularly apologising after abusive behaviour before repeating it again, and these aren't signs of love, they're signs of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And healthy relationships realistically are built on trust, communication and respect. And healthy relationships, we do argue, don't we? They don't necessarily mean they're abusive, but feeling loved shouldn't mean that you feel frightened in a relationship.
Something that's easy to forget is that people outside the relationship usually only see small pieces of what's happening. Friends might see someone acting cheerful in public, neighbours might hear occasional arguments, colleagues may simply notice someone becoming quieter, but no single sign proves abuse. But when several signs appear together, it's worth checking in with someone.
So the stories we've discussed today remind us that domestic abuse can happen to anyone and that it often develops gradually rather than appearing overnight.
So now we've explored what domestic abuse is, the different forms it can take, the statistics, the Women's Day football campaigns and some real life cases that have shaped awareness in the UK. And now we'd like to focus on something that everyone listening can do, recognising the signs and knowing how to help.
So one of the hardest things that domestic abuse is that it often happens behind closed doors. So many victims become incredibly good at hiding what they're experiencing, and it's because they're frightened or embarrassed or actually worried that nobody will believe them. So friends, family members, neighbours or colleagues, what are we asking you to look for?
There isn't one single sign that tells you someone is experiencing abuse, but there are patterns of behaviour that may indicate that something isn't right. For example, has someone who used to be competent suddenly become withdrawn? Do they stop coming to social events without explanation? Do they always seem anxious about getting home on time? Do they receive constant phone calls or messages from their partner asking where they are?
And you might also notice that they no longer have access to their own money, or they always ask their partner's permission before making any decisions. Some people actually might begin wearing clothing that hides their injuries, or wear clothing that they might not normally wear, particularly during the warmer weather, that you might notice people are like trying to cover up injuries. They might become isolated from family or friends, or seem unusually nervous when their partner is around.
And it's important to remember that none of these signs automatically mean that someone is being abused. People can become withdrawn or anxious for many other reasons. But if you notice several of these changes together, it may be worth checking in with them.
Absolutely. I think in a safe environment to do that as well. Like, don't do it in front of the abuser. Absolutely. And I think that goes on then to like, what should you say then in that situation, isn't it? And this is something people often worry about because they might have noticed what they want and they're thinking, well, what if I've got this wrong? What if they don't want to talk to me about it? And I think actually the most important thing is just to approach any conversation that you have with very gently and without any judgment, and when it's safe to do so, because you could be putting yourself at risk also by asking these questions.
You could say something like, I've noticed you haven't seemed yourself lately, is everything okay? Or if anything is happening that you'd like to talk about, I'm here to listen. It's as simple as that. You just offer yourself as a listening ear, offer yourself as a support person. And simple questions like these can open the door without putting pressure on someone to answer you.
Absolutely. And if they do choose to tell you that they're experiencing abuse, the most important thing that you can do is listen.
Yeah.
Avoid interrupting, avoid judging, like they've been through enough of that, and avoid asking the question of, why don't you just leave? I think we've highlighted just how important it is that people can't just simply leave. Leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time for a victim, and there may be many reasons why they can't leave immediately.
Yeah, and if they do start talking about that they do want to leave, just ask, how can I help? What do you need me to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be that, you have a go bag at your home for them, or it could be that they need you to report what's going on their behalf, or you need to put up a bed for them for the night when they leave.
Yeah, or it could be that you have a safe word between you.
Yeah.
So if they say that, you go and...
Absolutely, or if they do make the decision and that you might be the person that they call to say, can you come and get me and take me there, please?
Exactly. You might be the person that they say, come and have the kids.
Yeah.
Just take the children away, I can sort myself out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes people mean well, but accidentally make things harder as well. So, for example, saying, I'm sure they didn't mean it, or relationships are difficult, or maybe if you both communicated better, these kind of comments can make victims feel blamed or distressed.
In a situation where they're already feeling like that.
Yeah.
Also, it's just not okay. So instead, actually, what you need to be saying is, I believe you. This isn't your fault. You don't deserve to be treated like this.
Yeah.
I'm here for you. And those simple statements can actually make and have a huge difference on potentially opening people up as well, because they need to know they're being heard and believed.
Yeah. And if someone is experiencing domestic abuse, they don't have to face it alone. There are specialist organisations across the UK which provide confidential advice, emergency accommodation, legal guidance and emotional support. Some of these main organisations include Women's Aid, which supports women and children experiencing domestic abuse, Refuge, which runs one of the UK's largest domestic abuse support services and provides safe accommodation and a 24-hour helpline, Respect Men's Advice, offering confidential support especially for male victims, Gallup, which supports LGBTQ plus people experiencing abuse, and Victim Support, which provides practical and emotional support for victims of crime, including domestic abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can add a few more onto that as well. So in Wales, you've got the Live Fear Free helpline. There's the National Centre of Domestic, that's not just Wales, but there's the National Centre of Domestic Violence. We've got Refuge as well. Like, there are quite wide number of people, and they're normally charities actually, that are there to offer you support.
Yeah, and I know around here we have Canon DVS.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yes, we
which
do.
I think are in quite a lot of different places, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, quite conveniently, they're up by the police station. I don't know if they still are. They're up by the police station, so that works quite well for them.
So they're very, and they do the IDVAs, like the Independent Domestic Violence Advisor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they become then your support system, your support person.
Yeah.
And they're there for you.
And of course, like, obviously, you've still got the police, haven't you? If you're in immediate danger, 999 will always be available for you. But if you can't speak, and I don't know how well people know this, they'll probably ask you if you can't speak anyway, but there is the silent solution that comes up that once you've rang 999, you can then press 55.
Yeah.
And that will alert the operator that you actually cannot speak on the phone, and they've just kind of got to listen in on the phone of what's going on, basically. And that's trying, like, another safety feature of trying to stop people. And like I said earlier, 101 these days, you can log things with them on 101. You may not be ready to report something with a 99 incident, but you can log incidents, and you can do that online as well.
Yeah.
It might not be safe for you to do that, but it's something that you are available to do. It might not be safe to do it on your phone, but it might be that you could do it from work, or it might be that you can go to the library and do it that way.
Yeah. Before we finish, let's reflect on some of the key messages from today's episode. So domestic abuse is not just physical violence, it can also involve emotional abuse, coercive control, financial abuse and sexual abuse and digital abuse actually. It affects women, men and children from every background. It can happen in any community, and it often remains hidden because victims are too frightened or too isolated to ask for help.
Absolutely. I think we've also learned that football tournaments such as the World Cup, they don't cause domestic abuse, but campaigns run by organisations like Women's Aid during major tournaments exist because research has shown that the abuse can increase during these major events. And the message is actually really clear in this, that football is never the excuse for violence, and the responsibility will always lie with the perpetrator.
And we discussed the importance of recognising warning signs, listening without judgment, and understand that leaving an abusive relationship is often far more complicated and dangerous than many people realise. We also looked at real life cases that have changed public awareness and even influenced UK law.
Yes, absolutely. And awareness is important, isn't it? Because education is one of the most powerful tools that we have. Every conversation helps reduce the stigma around domestic abuse. It might actually help, lead to it being eradicated. People can learn what the warning signs are, and actually may lead to them helping somebody one day. And then every survivor as well also feels able to speak about it. We're creating an environment where they're not alone potentially, and they can talk about their story.
Yeah, because domestic abuse just thrives in silence. The more we talk about it, the harder it becomes for abuse to remain hidden. Awareness doesn't solve the problem overnight, but it can save lives.
Absolutely, and look at the statistics. It's showing the more that we are becoming aware of these issues, the statistics are getting higher of report, especially with men. The men is coming forward more than what they were previously. But I think that's all then for today, isn't it? So I'd just like to thank everyone for spending the time with us today, for listening to such an important conversation. We know some of the topics we've covered have probably been quite difficult for our audience to hear, but we hope they've been informative and thought-provoking.
If anything that we've discussed in today's episode has affected you personally, or if you're worried about someone you know, please remember that support is available. Reaching out for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. And if you found this episode helpful, please consider sharing it with friends, family, or classmates, particularly if they might be in a similar situation. The more people who understand about domestic abuse, the more likely we're going to recognise it, be able to challenge it, and support those who are affected by it.
Yeah. And thank you for listening to Lawyers Who Lunch. Thank you for listening to Lawyers Who Lunch. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram and TikTok. If you have any topics you would like us to discuss or any other questions, don't forget to email in at lawyerswholunch@outlook.com.